And it seems like there is a tendency for scapegoating in that respect. You know, all the problems of the world.
Without question, Donald Trump is somebody's scapegoat. A large number of people scapegoat. Pope Francis is for others.
Welcome back to Mic'd Up Militants. I'm your host, David Gordon. Many Catholics don't know the work of René Girard, which in and of itself isn't a tragedy because his work, extrapolated theologically, perhaps misses the mark. However, that's not to say Girard's theories have no import to our endeavor to live faithfully in the modern world. Girard's mimetic theory, for example, explains many self-defeating and destructive patterns that we see playing out in the Christian world as well as the larger Western political world. Today, to discuss this, we have the honor of being joined by Dr. Michael Pakaluk. Dr. Pakaluk earned his PhD at Harvard University and is a professor of ethics and social philosophy at Catholic University of America. He's an accomplished book author and has published opinion pieces in, among other places, First Things and the Boston Pilot. Thanks so much for being on today, Dr. Pakaluk.
You're quite welcome. It's a real pleasure.
Sure. Just to start out, can you give the audience, we gave a brief introduction of your bona fides, but can you give them a bit of your background as a philosopher and as a teacher?
Well, I studied at Harvard, and so my background was in analytic philosophy, so-called, and as an undergraduate, I went through the gamut of philosophy of science and philosophy of language and philosophy of logic and mathematics. And then as a graduate student, I became more interested in political philosophy, and I ended up writing a dissertation under a very well-known political philosopher named John Rawls. But at the same time, I became quite interested in Aristotle, and I thought that the most philosophical truth was found in Aristotle and in Thomas Aquinas. So I over the years, really, at my late graduate school and early professional career, I became an expert in Aristotle, and a lot of my scholarly work, which is technical in character, is in Aristotelian philosophy.
Sure. Oh, well, today, as you know, we're discussing Girard. Can you give the audience a little bit of a primer on who he was? Why is he important? Why should we care about this man, this thinker, and kind of the system he developed for analyzing the world?
Well, I want to say that there are a lot of real fans of Girard. I'm highly critical of his work and its importance. He was a professor at the end of his life at Stanford University for about the last 15 years of his academic career, and was inducted into the French Academy. There are only 40 academicians in the French Academy, so that's a very, very high honor. So being a professor at Stanford and being in the French Academy, those are high honors. He's a very established literary critic, especially in French literature. But he's most famous for this mimetic theory of desire, which you mentioned, and it's really not that difficult. It really has four claims. So I can set them out for your audience, and they'll know the basics of what he taught. So should I do that?
Yes, absolutely. Let's hear about mimetic theory, and then maybe we can go into the nexus between that and Christian thought and kind of what we're seeing happening, maybe even in the Christian world today and modern political thought. But if you just give us a brief outline of what mimetic theory is, I'd be most obliged.
Well, think of it as consisting of three claims and then an application. So the first claim is that all desire is mimetic. And what that means is that we don't just on our own, independently, autonomously decide or not to desire something, but you always desire something in relation to someone else, and typically taking for our own some desire that someone else has. So, so a really famous person goes on television and endorses deodorant and says, "I love this deodorant." Well, we are disposed ourselves to desire to use that deodorant more because it's been already modeled by a famous person than the fact that we independently think it's a good deodorant. So, but Girard says something very radical about this. He doesn't say that some desires are mimetic in that sense, that we imitate other people in desiring things. He says that all desire is mimetic. So if you say something like, well, what about a baby who's newly born and clearly desires to suck on his mother's breast, Girard would dismiss that and he'd say, well, that's an animal impulse. It's an animal appetite. So the claim that all desire is mimetic risks being true by definition. So anything that isn't mimetic, Girard might very well say it's just not a desire.
It's unfalsifiable, in other words.
Yeah, that might be an initial criticism. So to claim that every single desire whatsoever is mimetic is a very bold claim. You see this in social sciences all the time, these kind of extravagant claims. You find people saying that this is like the theory of gravity. It's omnipresent. It explains everything. So right away from the start, you see that the real fans of Girard just love it because they think it actually explains everything having to do with human life.
Well, sure, but for Catholics, let me ask this. That sounds very anathema, because I know as Catholics, we are created to know, love, and serve God, and would have an innate desire to do that. And that's what God instilled in human beings who are created in his image and likeness. And therefore, we have the desire for life and truth, because God, of course, is life and truth. So as Catholics, we can't buy into mimetic theory straight away, can we?
You make a really excellent point, because I think one of the deepest criticisms of this idea, and this is the first of the three ideas in his theory, is that it subverts the transcendentals. So good, truth, and beauty are, as you say, they have a claim on us which comes from beyond, and they're all realized most perfectly in God. And this is independent of what anyone else wants. And they're the most important desires, and they're certainly not mimetic. So it's as if it subverts or blocks us off from a consideration of these most important desires. If you assert from the start that all desire is mimetic, it makes it horizontal. It makes human desire purely horizontal rather than vertical, the way it is most fundamentally. So I think that's a really, really good criticism that you've raised. I think another criticism is that many things that we desire, even in Girard's sense, we're aware that we're desiring them in a singular way, not because other people are desiring them. I'll give you an example. My parents they loved 50s music and Frank Sinatra and popular singers like that. I discovered in a closet someday when I was a little kid, a record player, and I put on Grieg's Peer Gynt Suite. I didn't know what it was. I heard the first movement, which is the morning mood. And I thought to myself, this is the most exquisite thing I've ever heard in my life. And I just became completely obsessed with it. I became glued to it. I came back to that record player and played that over and over and over again. And I was aware that I was the only one in my household or anyone that I knew who loved this music. It was not at all mimetic. I knew no one else who loved that music.
Sure.
So this happens all the time.
Yeah, it seems like it wouldn't properly be able to explain human diversity then, if I'm following your train of thought, perhaps.
No, exactly right. Another example of desires which are not mimetic are market desires. So just think of Adam Smith's examples from, you go to the butcher and you want some meat and maybe you have some bread to trade. Well, you want meat. He wants bread. You're not imitating his desire for bread because you've had enough bread already. You have a superfluity of bread. Yeah, and he's not imitating your desire for meat. It's actually because your desires are complementary that you're cooperating with each other, not because you're imitating each other. So his theory has no application to the most widespread human activity, which is market exchanges.
Sure. Let me ask, and obviously there are probably on a secondary level some truths buried in this theory. It probably does explain certain human behaviors, just not all human behaviors, as his advocates, people more fanatical about Girard would maybe proclaim. But what are the outgrowths of his theory? Like, when it's taken to its logical end, what does this mean for us on a day-to-day basis? What does it mean for human civilization, and what kind of outgrowth philosophies are there from this?
Well, let's go on maybe to the second idea that he has, because
Sure.
To me, the most discouraging thing about it is that he says something that's true, But if you take it very seriously, it kind of blocks you from learning the whole tradition about human nature, because human nature is not so easily reducible to some kind of simple formula the way Girard tries to do. So if you become a Girardian, then you're not going to pay attention to what Aristotle said and what Plato said, and you're not going to read great literature where many, many other mechanisms, if you will, or devices or relationships or truths about human nature are revealed. You become very reductionistic. I think that that's the main problem with this theory. Okay, so the first thing he says is that all desire is mimetic. Not just some, not every now and again, but all desire is mimetic. And then he says that mimetic desire leads to enmity. Because if I desire the same thing as you and you desire the same thing as me, then we're put in conflict with each other. Because he says, he says, suppose there's one copy, then only one of us can get it. And of course, the obvious immediate rejoinder, which he skips by, is, well, what if there isn't one copy, right? What if it's a desire that's spiritual in character for spiritual good, which is not really divisible? Like the more I desire to pray, no way conflicts with your desire to pray, or to go to Holy Mass. It doesn't conflict with your desire to go to Holy Mass. So spiritual goods are generally not competitive goods, and the common good is not a competitive good properly understood. And then even with material goods, if there are more than one copy, then there's no reason for us to be in enmity with each other. If there's abundance rather than scarcity. So if he assumes that coincidence of desires leads to competition and enmity, then he's adopting what in economics you call basically a Malthusian pessimistic nature of human beings essentially set against each other because of scarcity of goods. And economists basically take two views. They're either Malthusians or they're like Adam Smith, and Adam Smith saw abundance as kind of the role of economic activity rather than scarcity. So immediately Girard aligns himself with the Malthusians with this move that he makes. And then even if there was if there was scarcity and you and I both wanted it, we could also decide to compete. That happens all the time. May the best man win, and we realize that both of us can't get something. So all's fair in love and war. War can be violent, but kind of battling over winning the heart of a woman doesn't need to be violent. So why competition? Why does it need to be enmity? Why not just competition?
Right.
And then also something else which happens is when many people find they're desiring the same thing, they differentiate their desires pretty naturally. Like if we all, bow ties became the thing, and I'm wearing a bow tie, and everybody starts wearing pink bow ties. Well, I might go over to a blue red bow tie because it makes me different. So
I think millennials are doing the pink bow ties now. So you're in luck.
That's my new mustache. If you can see that, that is actually Girardian mimetic desire, because I've seen some trendy people wearing mustaches. So this is absolutely a case of mimetic desire, but but it's just one, it's one of the few things in which I think I actually desire something because someone else desires it. But
right. Well, though, it goes back to your original critique. It's something you admired and perhaps thought looked handsome on somebody else, so you wanted to give it a whirl. But that doesn't mean necessarily because they desired it, you desired it.
Well, that's a very good point, because what actually happens is that I start growing this mustache, and every morning I look in the mirror and I say, well, is this making me look silly, or is it making me look smart and debonair? And if I decide it's silly, I'm going to stop growing. I'll grow back my beard. I'm not going to go in that direction just because someone else is wearing a mustache.
Well, that's a transcendental
you're absolutely
beauty.
Correct.
You're chasing that transcendental beauty. Now, if we listen to our wives, every time I've ever attempted a mustache, I've had complaints, and seems like everybody's dad in their wedding photo had a bad mustache. At least that's my experience. Sorry, Bob.
My wife is very stylish, and the last time I tried to do this, it was immediately nixed by her. But I've noticed that she's kind of withheld judgment. I think she's aware that it is a trend, and she wants to see how it shapes up before she finally, gives it the axe, which I think is coming soon.
Okay, so we've established, if you follow this to its conclusion, the one that Girard suggests, then, there's going to be a kind of conflict, a tension between people. Again, he's assuming the pie is fixed and we're going to be in competition. And in this kind of invidious competition with each other to get
Yes.
whatever fixed
Yes.
goods because, what have you. So what does he take from that? What does he glean from that? Where does he go with that?
That's the third step. So the first step is all desire is mimetic. The second step is that because desire is mimetic, desire leads us into enmity, conflict, polarization of the very nature of the case. Right. So in the classic Catholic tradition, human desire leads us all to cooperate because our material goods, we can't each get them on our own. It's a corporate thing. Like I'll specialize in baking bread and you'll specialize in making wine and we'll trade with each other. But so there's a fundamentally social and cooperative and unitive character to desire in the Catholic tradition. But as I said, Girard is a Malthusian, and he thinks of our desires as fundamentally setting us at odds with one another. So, and then that's the third step. So the third step is that we have to resolve this somehow because we have to find a way of staying united. And the way that we do this is that we focus our enmity. And why we would agree to focus our enmity on something is unexplained on his theory, but we focus our enmity on a single person who's we regard as a scapegoat. He carries guilt, and we destroy the scapegoat or we expel him from our society, and that serves as the basis of society going forward. So he thinks all social unities have at their origin in the past some identification of a scapegoat and the expelling of the scapegoat. And this is also a very dubious theory because, first of all, if desire is a constant in human nature, and if enmity follows from desire, then why would expelling one scapegoat at one time in the distant past create unity? It seems to me we need to be expelling scapegoats constantly. We need to be every day a new scapegoat, it seems to me. And since there are different dimensions and different desires, there need to be multiple scapegoats, one for each of those desires that we have. And then it's hard even to see why guilt becomes the criterion by which we mark out a scapegoat. Where's guilt? Guilty of what? I mean, what is a scapegoat guilty of anyway? And why not just identify him as someone who likes inappropriately or doesn't follow our desires or a dissenter or something like that? Why guilt? So to me, it's a completely unexplained and unsatisfactory part of his theory, this identification of the scapegoat.
Well, sure, and it elevates the subconscious so high above the conscious mind. I'd like to think that if we were in fact doing all of that, it also calls into question like a collective intelligence sort of thing. But if we were doing this, it seems like we would realize that we're scapegoating and foisting onto some hapless individual all of these negative feelings, somewhat artificially, inorganically. But this also would seem to conflict with, as you really, I mean, you kind of pointed it out, or at least you led us to that water, the idea of the communion of saints, where, mankind, just as we're created in God's image, and God is a community of persons, mankind is created to be, in the body of Christ, members of the body of Christ, in a community of persons. If there's this inherent tension in mankind, that does not seem to comport with the deposit of faith.
There is a tension, but it comes from original sin. So on a Catholic tradition, we'd want to say, well, is this just another way of explaining the discord that arises among us because of original sin? And it doesn't seem to be that. It seems to be an explanation which relies upon an account of human nature rather than some kind of fallen aspect of us. But then that leads to the last thing which I mentioned, which was an application. So I said the theory had three parts, and then there was an application. So the first part is that all desire is mimetic. The second part is that mimetic desire leads to polarization and enmity among us. And the third is that enmity gets resolved so that we can achieve some kind of social unity through identification of the scapegoat and expelling the scapegoat. But then the application is that Christianity is just an example of this, right? So, except, and this is what Girard says, except in all of the other traditions of the scapegoat is regarded as guilty, but in Christianity, Jesus is explicitly said to be innocent. And this is what makes Christianity different from all of these myths. And in saying that he's resolving a problem that goes back to a kind of a student of other cultures named Fraser, who wrote this this book called The Golden Bough, and it's about a myth of a kind of dying god and a resurrected god, which recurs in different cultures. And this was in the middle 1800s. And it was regarded as a kind of challenge to Christianity, because Christianity looked at, so to speak, anthropologically. You could say it's just one among many myths or legends about a god who dies and comes back to life. And Chesterton was concerned with replying to this, and so was C.S. Lewis, who followed Chesterton. And what they said is that the legend of a dying and resurrected God is in many different cultures, like traces or reflections of the truth. But what's different about Christianity is not that there's some kind of innocent scapegoat. It's rather that it's true. Like, it actually happened in the case of Christianity. All the myths and legends are like reflections. So that's a much better way of dealing with the Fraser challenge to Christianity than Girard's way. And then there's another issue, which is that everybody who was putting Jesus to death thought that he was guilty, right? Except, maybe the Pharisees or some of them believed that he was innocent. But the general kind of view of the Romans in the crowd was that he was guilty. He was making himself to be a king rather than Caesar. He treated himself as being equal to God, so he blasphemed and he was guilty and he should be put to death. So it's not even true that he was sacrificed, so to speak, in some kind of understanding that he was innocent. And then as St. Paul says, in a deep theological sense, he became sin. He had to become sin in order to take our sin. So Girard's interpretation of Christianity is fundamentally wrong. And it also misconstrues the nature of the sacrifice, because for Girard, the scapegoat is expelled in order to unify society. But of course, Jesus didn't unify the Romans and the people of Israel. The Romans destroyed Jerusalem, and about 40 years later, they leveled it to the ground. There was no commonality established between them by expelling the scapegoat. And in any case, the death of Jesus we understand to be a redemption. It's the payment of a debt that's owed. It's not a scapegoat. It's an entirely different category. He gets the category completely wrong. So as a kind of an interpretation of Christianity, or a way of saying, wow, Christianity is really true because it's in accordance with this universal theory of social relations, which Girard has set down, it actually gets Christianity completely wrong. And anyone who tries to understand it in those terms is making some really serious theological mistakes.
Right. No, absolutely. And I'm glad we have now, that seems well settled. That's kind of the straight dope with regard to that as applied, kind of as a primary theory of knowledge, as a primary anthropological theory, and as a theological theory. I think what you just said is the dagger in the heart of that. I do want to ask, though, because that doesn't mean there's not morsels of truth that are relevant to today's day and age in Girard's thought. And I wanted to see, what do you think he got right? Now that we've established, yes, he got things wrong. You don't want to become a disciple of Girard, audience members, but he does say things that are important. What did he get right?
Well, I take a very dim view of it. I say that everything they got right, you can find somewhere else in a more balanced way. But he seems to be found to be most impressive among people who had begun with another false view of human nature, which is that we are independent, autonomous, self-creating beings, right? So it's a kind of romantic, in some sense Nietzschean, in some sense Kantian view of human nature, that we're telling our own story, that we're very creative, that we create ourselves, that we're and autonomous, we're completely free in how we decide things. And then somebody points out, well, actually, most of the things that you like and want to go after, you're just doing so because you're following a crowd. This strikes people as a kind of a great insight, but that's because they already began with a very mistaken view of themselves. So this correction, which is going from one extreme to another extreme strikes them as revelatory.
Sure.
So, but probably Girard's view is a healthier one than the view of self-creation and autonomy. So to that extent, you could say, well, it's at least they've escaped that other much worse view.
Well, I feel like in the age of the mass media and social media and the rumor mill that it's become, I think Girard's focus on at least imitation, the tendency of people to imitate others and fall into groupthink in a sense. I think perhaps that is an important point that, while I think he has this on steroids, it's hyperbolized in his view, it's a primary driver of human behavior in his view. I do think at the margins, particularly with what we're seeing today, this pile-on effect, whether it's on the left or on the right, where people will march along to fables as long as it's the fables that, their favorite teachers are spinning. Did he get something right in that respect? Just the fact that people fall into groupthink and imitate others kind of mindlessly, doggedly?
I'm hesitant to say yes. Let's take the most recent example of that. I don't know where you stand, David, but I thought there was tremendous lemming-like behavior in the COVID lockdowns. People did not think carefully about what civil liberties were. They did not examine the evidence about the limited effectiveness of the vaccines or the complete incompetence of face masks to stop the spread of a virus. They didn't look into any of these things, and they preferred to, out of maybe a little bit of fear and cowardice, lack of boldness, lack of trust in their own judgments. They're very, very, very loath to step outside of the crowd. And then even going to some extremes of denouncing, being quick to denounce out of this kind of self-righteousness, their fellow citizen. I don't think that had anything to do with Girard. And so you might even say, with mimetic desire, and so you might even say, well, no, the theory is actually harmful because it's driving us away from considering the actual causes of this. Now, I think the actual cause is a lack of education. So education enables someone to adopt on his or her own judgments on the merits of something rather than because other people say so. We were getting at this at the very beginning, right? So if I'm well educated in music, I can listen to different types of music, whether it's country and so on, and then I decide, and it's maybe this country singer I think on the merits is actually a very good one, but this other one is not. Maybe Taylor Swift is without question the most popular musician on the face of the earth right now, but I believe her music is very bad, and I don't really listen to it.
Not a Swiftie? Yeah.
No, I'm not in the slightest. But but I find the whole thing kind of a spectacle. But because I have education in music, and I think anyone who's well educated in music will not, maybe as a kind of like party or something like that, you'd want to go to a Swift concert, but not because of the musical grounds or even entertainment grounds. So and then as regards people don't even know what a virus is. They don't know what the size of a virus is. They don't know how to read papers that have. They don't know how to make statistical inferences. They aren't aware enough about the fallibility of and lack of credibility of a lot of these authorities,
sure,
both in government and in science. So they just don't know. They don't have any kind of basis for making their own judgment, and it's that which makes them a kind of fodder to be pushed around by public opinion, not because of some fundamental desire to imitate what other people desire. So Girard is not. Let me ask you, David. Do you think that Girard gives a good account of the lemming-like behavior of people during the COVID lockdowns? Do you think that it's truthful?
Boy, putting me on the spot. Well, I do see, certain aspects. I think if we could parse, perhaps, the motivation behind the lemming-like behavior, I think he does observe that yes, people tend to fall into certain collective movement towards something that, isn't necessarily a good. So in that score, I would say he does get that right. If we can extrapolate that like nugget of truth, not that it's unique to Girard, because other thinkers have thought this and for better reasons, but if we can extrapolate that, it is somewhat gratifying to say mimetic theory, because it's like, yeah, I see a lot of people and they seem to be just imitating what other people have said and what other people have done, largely to maybe not be pariahs from this collective, largely to be incorporated into a community. But yes, as a Catholic thinker, I would say, well, that has something to do with man's innate desire for acceptance, which, when it's not in the realm of original sin and concupiscence, obviously is a good thing. We're called to be members of the communion of saints and to worship in harmony the divine essence in the beatific vision, and that's ultimately our destiny. So there's something to the fact that in a healthy society, yes, it should be looked askance upon to go against the wisdom, which would ultimately be truth. So in that regard, I would say, yeah, and I also assure you, I am a pureblood. I didn't wake up, I didn't take the serum or anything like that. But I've been distraught in the past few years to see just the amount of goose stepping along with a popular narrative. And I see it on the right too. I'm not trying to be egalitarian here. Obviously, the left has a lot more problems. Anyone who knows my political leanings would say that. But then I hear people on the right saying things and drinking the Kool-Aid from thinkers on the right. Oh yeah, all vaccines don't work. No, this didn't work. You should probably your kids for tetanus and whatnot. Oh, is the mark of the beast. No, that's absurd. I'm sure the mark of the beast is going to be much worse than wearing a silly, ineffective. I don't know. I'll punt to you on that. What do you think? Am I?
Well, I think this is very interesting. So you mentioned the communion of the saints, and there at the very beginning of Christianity, there was, as you know, the document that was Apostolic Age, which is the Didache, the teaching of the 12 apostles, and there's a way of life and a way of death. And John Paul II, of course, also taught about the culture of death and the culture of life. So part of being a follower of Christ means identifying the right community and then imitating people in that community. There's no question that we do this, right? And then wanting to be such that others might want to imitate us also in that community. So, so then if we emphasize the fact that we are going to be imitating one way or another and becoming like those we like, then we have to pick the right friends, so to speak. We have to put ourselves in the right group, identify with the right group. I think that's very, very useful advice.
Sure.
And I suppose if you see the power of imitation in forming our desire, and if Girard does that, maybe overstates the case. I'm for sure he overstates the case. But if he conveys the power of this imitation of those we identify with, then it should make people a little bit have more circumspection about what is their reference group. It should be the saints.
Absolutely. No, there's good wisdom there. Let me pivot real fast to something else
Sure.
That's obviously central to Girard, and this idea of scapegoating. I think when, especially look at the modern church, so many of the faithful want to look at the state of the world today and the state of disarray it's in, and the culture of death, and the confusion that abounds, and look to the hierarchy and be like, look, it's these hierarchs, they're not doing their job. That's the reason the world is on fire. There's a whole cult basically devoted to, taking the worst spin on what Pope Francis says each time and applying a hermeneutic of suspicion to it as opposed to a hermeneutic of trust. And it seems like there is a tendency for scapegoating in that respect. All the problems of the world, it's on the hierarchs and the magisterium. What would you say to that? Does Girard get something right there? Am I am I reading too much into him?
You might make me a convert. I mean, you're saying some very important things. Without question, Donald Trump is somebody's scapegoat. A large number of people's scapegoat. Pope Francis is for others. maybe we could say, why why is it that somebody like Peter Thiel loved Girard so much? That Girard is right about certain types of human association and certain domains of human social life, especially about internet socialization. He may be, extremely right about that. So we do see this kind of thing that Girard highlights. I don't think it's as deep and pervasive in human nature as he believes, but it maybe has become, very important because of the internet. So this kind of group and pack behavior, this kind of splitting up into groups that are opposed to each other, the bubble effect that we see in the internet, and then within each bubble you pick some bogeyman on which you can focus your hatred, and that helps to unify you with everyone within that bubble. Yeah, I think that's so. I'm becoming now. We have to come up with a name for this. It's not somebody who's a true believer, but something like a pragmatic Girardian.
That's a neo-Girardian.
A neo-Girardian. That's I'm prepared to become that, David. I think you've made that good case. I just look at it from a philosopher's point of view and say this is not very good as a theory.
Well, absolutely. I'm right there beside you. But let me apply this in the realm of politics, because we do see the rise of a certain Gramscian neo-Marxism in the West, where there is critical race theory, and there is creating a scapegoat or bogeyman class in America, because we don't have the bourgeoisie, strictly speaking. We're not this the type of society that scientific Marxism would necessarily apply to. Obviously, we don't, we're not like a factory industrial society. So there had to be kind of a wedge issue that was created, and that race, it appears, has taken the place of that, which is why BLM, of course, was founded by quote unquote trained Marxists. Whatever that means. I didn't know there's a Marxist school. I guess all schools are kind of Marxist, at least they were when I went to college. So do you think that is this idea of scapegoating being played out? Is that we do see, the majority placing emphasis on, America, the straight white male, the straight white Christian male, that's become the bogeyman scapegoated class, and we're told that there will be societal peace when that class is eliminated, or at least in the case of the straight white male, neutered, made into pagan, male feminists and whatnot. So does it have import in that regard? Or again, am I reading too much into it?
Well, that's something like scapegoating goes on. That seems correct. It seems undeniable. Right, and we do tend to do this, but I wonder whether Girard is right about the mechanism, because doesn't the same thing happen, for example, in a household or even in a marriage, right? You can have a marriage where each of the two spouses treats the other as the reason for all of his or her problems, right? So I'd be more concerned with looking at something else in human nature, the sorts of things that our Lord was concerned about in the Sermon on the Mount, this where we, look at the little splinter in our brother's eye, we don't look at the log in our own eye, or just hypocrisy where we don't look at ourselves and find the same issues that we're, finding in others. I think that's more important, and that's the source of this rather than mimetic desire and its polarizing effects.
Right. Next time, by the way, my wife gets mad at me, I'm just going to be like, you are scapegoating me. I know I didn't take out the trash. Don't scapegoat me, sweetheart. Yeah.
Right, because it's, it is legendary that it's always the wife's fault, whatever the problem is, right? So yeah. Lots of men operate on that kind of presumption.
Sure. Okay, well, so we're getting up against the clock here, and I know you have a very busy schedule, so we want to be respectful of that. But, I mean, if you kind of could outro this and put just, conclude it, put a fine point on it, what do people need to know about Girard, his thought, going forward? I think there are kind of disciples of Girard in Catholic circles, people that you will hear citing mimetic theory on social media and whatnot. What do you have to say to them? Just any last thoughts?
Well, I understand Girard either was a Catholic or he converted to Catholicism. So I think that's admirable. It's certainly something in his that counts highly in my view of him. But that doesn't mean that everything that he said is consistent with Catholic truth. I mean, Graham Greene, for example, would be somebody who converted to Catholicism, or he had Max Scheler had his Catholic faith. But you always have to, be good bankers, is what our Lord used to say. You have to distinguish the good from the bad. You can't just, with anything that you get from the world, you can't just accept it whole cloth. You have to make distinctions and take some things and reject some other things. So the first thing I would say about Girard is that he's very admirable. He says things that are, deep ways, true, at least in some respects, but that we need to be good bankers relative to his thought. We need to, with discretion, take what's good from it, but also be sure to reject what's not good and what's not truthful in it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Would you
I would say we should be Christians who are very interested in Girard rather than Girardians who explain Christianity in his terms.
Absolutely. And that's the whole Christian tradition, isn't it? Looking into the things that even various cultures have gotten right and take those things and kind of baptize them into the world, the Christian worldview, because of course truth doesn't contradict truth, and then filter out what's bad and what other cultures or thinkers have gotten wrong.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Yeah. Dr. Pakaluk, thank you very much for coming on Mic'd Up. We're very appreciative, obviously, brilliant man, and thank you for your articulate explanation of an important thinker, at least one that is being more and more bandied about in Catholic social circles.
And he died recently, so let's pray for his soul. I think the way a Christian looks at this is we all benefit from the ideas that he put forward. So let's be grateful for that. Although I've been pretty critical of them, but still, it's he's moved things forward.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for being on the show. That's it for this week's Mic'd Up, militants. Thank you so much for tuning in. God bless you. We'll see you next week. And please do support us continuing into the future with both your views and, if you have the means, with your donations. God bless you. See you next week.